scope and scale of what occurred last night would take the breath away.
Once over land, the B-2s linked up with escort and support aircraft in a complex, tightly timed maneuver requiring exact synchronization across multiple platforms in a narrow piece of airspace, all done with minimal communications.
Buckle up, because the U.S. military unleashed a massive airstrike on Iran's nuclear facilities, a high-stake operation dubbed Midnight Hammer that was a mammoth undertaking by the U.S. Air Force. This is a story of overcoming a monstrous threat, a decades-long shadow cast by Iran's nuclear ambitions through precision, power, and some of the most advanced aircraft in the U.S. arsenal. Let's dive into the facts, piece by piece, and break down what happened, how it went down, and what it means for the skies over Iran on this episode of Taking Off. Dan Milliken here. We're going to take an in-depth look into the U.S. airstrike of the Iranian nuclear facilities. We'll discover where the Iranian nuclear program came from, the recent war with Israel, and the U.S. air mission, and talk to a KC-135 pilot about how air missions like this work. And of course, along the way, we'll talk about the elephant in the room. Whatever happened to those Iranian Air Force F-14 Tomcats? All right, let's get started. For decades, Iran's nuclear program has loomed like a dark cloud over the Middle East, a potential monster threatening regional stability. And the regime in Iran constantly reminds the world that its goal is the destruction of Israel and the destruction of the U.S. Nuclear bombs would enable the fundamentalists to attempt their stated goal. And while reasonable people might eschew nuclear escalation, radical zealots with a finger on the trigger cannot be depended on for rational thinking. Before going over the aviation aspects of this current conflict, it's important to understand how Iran has gotten to this nuclear point. Let's quickly go over the history. In 1953, President Eisenhower, in his first year as president, stepped up to the podium at a brand new building in New York City. The United Nations were holding their General Assembly. He delivered a speech destined to be known as Atoms for Peace. His premise was that nuclear danger should be shared by all, and hope shared by all. Atoms for Peace provided technology and educational resources for countries wanting civilian nuclear programs.
My country wants to be constructive, not destructive. It wants agreements, not wars. It is not enough to take this weapon out of the hands of the soldiers. It must be put into the hands of those who will know how to strip its military casing and adapt it to the arts of peace.
And so the civilian nuclear program began for the country of Iran with the help and assistance of the West. The 1979 Islamic Revolution changed everything, souring U.S.-Iran relations and turning the program into a secretive, controversial endeavor. By the 2000s, Iran was enriching uranium at sites like Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, raising alarms about its potential to build nuclear weapons. The Fordo fuel enrichment plant, buried deep under a mountain near Qom, became a particular concern due to its fortified design. Natanz, Iran's largest uranium enrichment complex, and Isfahan, home to uranium conversion facilities and research reactors, rounded out the trio of key sites. Over the past 2 decades, international efforts to curb Iran's nuclear program have centered on diplomatic agreements, primarily the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, signed in 2015. In 2018, evidence that Iran was secretly continuing the weaponization of their nuclear program prompted President Trump to pull the U.S. out of the agreement. Israel's Operation Rising Lion, launched on June 12, 2025, targeted Iran's nuclear and military sites, weakening its air defenses and setting the stage for the U.S. to step in.
Last night, on the President's orders, U.S. Central Command, under the command of General Eric Kurilla, executed Operation Midnight Hammer, a deliberate and precise strike against 3 Iranian nuclear facilities.
On June 21st, 2025, the U.S. launched direct airstrikes on Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. The operation, named Midnight Hammer, involved a meticulous planned assault with several firsts, including the first time the U.S. forces attacked Iranian soil. The decision came after Israeli strikes depleted Iran's air defenses, but Israel lacked the heavy munitions needed to penetrate Fordo's underground bunkers. According to U.S. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the strikes began at 6:40 Eastern Time, which was 2:10 a.m. Iran time, on June 21st, and concluded 25 minutes later.
14 30,000-pound GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, marking the first ever operational use of this weapon.
The U.S. deployed a staggering 125 aircraft, including stealth bombers, fighter jets, tankers, surveillance planes, and support crews, alongside a U.S. Navy submarine launching Tomahawk cruise missiles. This was a full-court press to neutralize the nuclear threat. Let's talk hardware, because the U.S. brought some of the most serious firepower you can have to this fight. The star of the show was the Northrop Grumman B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, the only aircraft that's capable of carrying the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, or MOP. It's a 30,000-pound bunker buster designed to punch through fortified targets like the mountain reservoir of Fordo. The B-52, although it can carry heavy ordnances, would require modifications to be able to carry the GBU-57. So the B-2 is the only one and has a range of 6,800 miles. 7 B-2s flying an 18-hour mission, 37 hours including the round trip, from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, dropped a total of 14 MOPs on Fordo and Natanz. These beasts, each weighing over 15 tons, are guided by GPS and can penetrate up to 200 feet of reinforced concrete before detonating. I can't imagine, as a pilot, the sudden loss of 30,000 pounds from your aircraft. Those pilots will have a great story to tell at their United interview for the airlines. This was the first time the GBU-57 ordnance had been used, and the largest B-2 operation strike. The mission was the second longest of the B-2s. The longest was after 9/11. The B-2s didn't go in alone. A strike package of 4th and 5th generation fighter jets, likely including F-22 Raptors and F-35 Lightning IIs, escorted the bombers, sweeping for enemy aircraft and surface-to-air missile SAM threats. The Air Force calls it a protection package. The Pentagon hasn't confirmed the exact fighter types, but these stealthy jets would have been ideal for clearing the skies in front of the B-2s. Dozens of tanker aircraft, likely the KC-135 Stratotankers and the KC-46 Pegasus, kept the strike force fueled over the long haul, while surveillance planes provided real-time intel. I talked with KC-135 pilot James Spearman of Spearman Aircraft to get a better picture of those operations.
I've refueled B-2s a lot. This mission, to get them all the way to Iran and back, I don't know how many refuelings it took, but I assume it was a lot of working pieces to pull that off. When we're doing our pre-flight, we do have some tools that help us. Obviously, just doing math about our altitude and how fast we're flying. We can punch in our altitude and calculated winds and how far it is based off of our length or our flight path, and the box will spit out a number. Here's your takeoff window. The only thing you hear is just the mission, but the massive undertaking and the teams of people all working together to essentially carry this out. And I'm not getting political or anything, just, great job to those team members for successfully executing, and it makes me proud, right, I'm a part of that team. I do 100% believe, that the Air Force, our United States Air Force, our military in general, but I mean, this is the greatest Air Force the world has ever seen. There's nothing comes close to, I think the hardware that we have, but also, just our team itself and the training and what all goes into it. I go to sleep well and rest well knowing that I'm on that team.
Thanks, James. Now, just before the B-2s entered Iranian airspace, a U.S. Navy submarine, possibly an Ohio class or Virginia class, launched over 24 Tomahawk cruise missiles at Isfahan's nuclear facilities. These precision-guided missiles, with a range of about 1,500 miles, struck last to maintain the element of surprise. The U.S. also used deception tactics, including decoy aircraft, to confuse Iran's defense. Some B-2s headed west from Missouri into the Pacific as a feint, while the main strike force approached from an undisclosed direction. Iran's air defenses, once a formidable challenge, were already battered by Israel's 8-day campaign before the U.S. strikes. Iran relies on a mix of Russian-supplied systems like the S-300 PMU-2, which can engage targets up to 120 miles away, and indigenous systems like the Bavar 373, touted as like an S-400 equivalent. Older Soviet-era SAMs, such as the S-200 and the SA-6, and radar-guided anti-aircraft guns round out their arsenal of air defenses. Iran's Air Force, led by aging U.S.-made F-14 Tomcats and Soviet MiG-29s, is limited by sanctions and maintenance issues. We'll talk about the famous F-14s in a moment. Israel's Operation Rising Lion started June 12th and systematically targeted Iran's SAM sites, the radar installations, and missile launchers, leaving gaping holes in their defense network. By June 21st, U.S. officials reported Iranian forces didn't fire on the incoming strike package at all, suggesting their defenses were either overwhelmed or disabled.
We are unaware of any shots fired at the package on the way out. Iran's fighters did not fly, and it appears that Iran's surface-to-air missile systems did not see us.
Iranian state media claimed air defenses were active over Tehran and intercepted hostile targets, but no U.S. aircraft were reported lost or even fired at. Post-strike satellite imagery showed significant damage at Fordo, with tunnel entrances collapsed or filled with debris, indicating Iran's defenses failed to stop the bunker busters. Now, let's take a moment to talk about Iran's F-14 Tomcats, a fascinating chapter in aviation history that's taken a beating in this conflict. Iran acquired 79 F-14s from the U.S. in the mid-1970s under the Shah's regime before the 1979 revolution cut off all support. These swept-wing fighters, made famous by Tom Cruise in Top Gun, were designed for air superiority, equipped with the AIM-54 Phoenix missile for long-range engagements. Iran used them effectively during the Iran-Iraq War, 1980-88, but the U.S. sanctions and parts shortages grounded most of the fleet over time. And though the airplane was very sexy, the mounting problems led to the U.S. canceling the program by the early 2000s. We interviewed one F-14 pilot, Richard Lucas, in an episode of our show In the Hangar, and here's what he had to say.
Even though back in the day when I was like, oh my God, this Top Gun is rock, this is the best, I want to be a pilot. The idea was that airplane, from my experiences in the training facility, through training cycles, was, hey, that airplane is a death sentence.
Oh.
And the reasoning was specific to the landing aboard the carrier. It's a highly swept wing, 72 feet wide. The landing environment on an aircraft carrier is very limited, and so any deviation of that center line could be significantly disastrous. Upon graduation, I'm sitting up on the stadium with my mom on one side, my dad on the other. They say, Ensign Lucas or Lieutenant J.G. Lucas, your select is Tomcats West.
Oh.
And I'm not kidding you. I sat there. I stood there with my mom and dad, and I went sheet white. My mom's looking at me, going, "Are you okay?" And I turned to her. I didn't say. I kept my face forward and stand straight up, and I said, "I'm dead."
Oh, no.
By 2025, estimates suggest Iran had fewer than 20 operational F-14s kept flying through reverse engineering and cannibalization. But really, that number is extremely high, I bet. Most likely a whole lot less. At the recent Kish Air Show in 2024 in the Middle East, a lone Iranian F-14 made an appearance with a flyby, as well as 3 F-5s and F-4s. Israel's strikes on June 16th targeted an airbase near Tehran, destroying 2 F-14s. They were non-operational before the strike via precision drone strikes, and footage released by the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF, showed the jets reduced to smoldering wrecks. With Israel and now the U.S. pounding Iran's airfields, it's likely that few, if any, Tomcats remain airworthy. The once mighty Tomcat, a symbol of Iran's defiance, is now a fading relic. All right, back to Operation Midnight Hammer. Satellite imagery and official statements paint a picture of significant destruction. At Fordo, images from June 22nd showed collapsed tunnel entrances and debris, suggesting the MOPs hit their mark. Natanz, previously damaged by Israeli strikes, took additional hits, with the IAEA confirming direct impacts on its underground enrichment halls. Isfahan's facilities, targeted by Tomahawks, also sustained damage, though specifics are less clear. Iranian officials, including advisor Mehdi Mohammadi, claimed the sites were evacuated beforehand with no irreversible damage or radiation leaks. The IAEA reported no radiological changes, but further assessments are ongoing. The U.S. and Israel aimed to slay the monster of Iran's nuclear program, and early reports suggest they dealt a heavy blow. Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, the heart of Iran's enrichment efforts, are severely damaged, potentially setting back Iran's capability for a nuclear weapon by years. However, U.S. military commanders caution that damage assessments are ongoing, and if Iran moved critical equipment beforehand, and there is satellite imagery from before the strikes showing trucks loading up. So follow-up strikes, they're not ruling them out. They might be needed. Iran's claim of evacuating nuclear materials adds uncertainty, but their weakened air defenses and decimated air force limit their ability to counter any further attacks. This operation was a masterclass in precision and coordination, showcasing the B-2's unmatched ability to deliver devastating payloads. The absence of U.S. losses highlights the effectiveness of the stealth technology and the electronic warfare in overcoming any of Iran's air defenses. And hats off to the U.S. Air Force for pulling off flawlessly a very complex operation.
In just a matter of weeks, this went from strategic planning to global execution. This operation underscores the unmatched capabilities and global reach of the United States military.
That's our report on Operation Midnight Hammer, the flight of the B-2 Spirits. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like a more hardcore aviation content, like that interview we did with the F-14 pilot, check out our sister channel In the Hangar right here. And thanks to our sponsors like Z-Vision, the brightest landing and taxi lights out there at xevision.com, and ClemensInsurance.net. When I switched to them, I saved a ton of money on my policies, mainly because they went to bat for me with the underwriters, which is what a great insurance agent will do. Check them out for whatever insurance needs that you might have. And if you enjoyed this report, here's a recent one that you can check out. Again, thanks for watching. Remember, superior judgment trumps superior skill. Take care.